forecasting, talk about decision support systems, and then kind of finish it off with communication. So as we go, if you've got questions, wave, use one of the participant button features and let us know. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. There's a bunch of materials, but I'm quite happy to come back individually with you and say, hey, I didn't really get this worksheet, Richard. How does this work? So the first thing that I want to cover with you is the notion of cash is king. We're in a period where sorry about that. There we go. Sorry. We're in a period where I believe you've got to move very, very quickly into a defensive position and adopt the position that cash is the ultimate. In many instances, that's not necessarily easy to do, but you've got to put yourself in a position where you control your cash. You are able to find ways to convert assets into cash, liabilities into less cash, perhaps. So put yourself in that position. So I've got two exercises that we use with Gazelle's clients to kind of walk you through that. So on the scaling up side, cash becomes a constraint. Most businesses that are trying to grow find themselves in a position where it's very difficult to keep up as you're growing with having cash. And so two of the concepts that we walk folks through, one is the cash conversion cycle, and the other one has to do with looking at various amounts on your P&L line and your balance sheet line, and how you can kind of exercise the lever and move those around. So the first one that I want to pick up on, let me just go get it. There we go. Everybody see this? It says cash acceleration strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. So this is an exercise that we take people through to have them understand, where does cash get trapped in your business? We can actually measure the amount of time in your business where a dollar goes out and the length of time that it takes for that dollar effectively to come back. And we say to companies and work with them and say, in each of the typical 4 cycles, one of them is a sales cycle where you're actually generating new orders. One's a make, production, deliver cycle. So if you're in the service business, you're providing billable hours to your customers. You're ultimately finishing up on construction drawings for them. The delivery is the exchange. So I'm now done the goods or the services. And then the billing and payment cycle, which is the back end of it, where your back office issues the invoice and goes through the collection process. So ideally, you're in a state where that number is a small positive number. There are companies that have negative numbers. They have negative numbers because they're actually able to, through their business model and through some of their own processes, actually collect more cash than what they spend. Dell Computers is a good example. Dell's got a negative 21 days in their cash conversion cycle because they take deposits from customers, because they don't hold any inventory, so they're not forking money out for inventory. And they also, with their vendors, work on a just-in-time basis so that they don't have to pay them for some time. So we take clients through this and say, in each of these cycles, think about what could you do to make some improvements. And we look at 3 areas. We look at shortening the cycle time, we look at eliminating mistakes, and we look at the business model. So in terms of cycle time, is there anything that can be done on the delivery to a customer, from the point where the shipping dock's got the goods to the point they go to the customer? Is there anything that can be done to take a day out of that cycle? Every day that you take out of that cycle will improve your cash conversion cycle, i.e. the amount of time the cash is out of your business. Eliminating mistakes is one that we find a whole bunch of examples, right? If you issue an invoice to a customer and the invoice has got an error, what happens? If you don't have proactive collection procedures, customer on the other end is going to say, well, someday they'll phone me, and then my first excuse is going to be the invoice is wrong. If you're shipping and you're missing parts, so I'm shipping a barbecue and a side burner, and I only send the barbecue. Customers got another reason to say, well, I'm not interested in paying you, I'm missing a piece. So find those opportunities throughout your various cycles to reduce mistakes or make improvements to your processes. And the final one is the business model. And that talks to, do you have ability in your business to change the traditional way that business is done? And some of the classic examples, Costco. Costco charges a membership fee. It accounts for the vast majority of its annual profit every year. But more importantly, it's a huge source of cash for them on their balance sheet, that when they go out and build a store, they don't have to be worried about, well, okay, where am I going to get the financing for that? They've got very, very healthy cash reserves. So not everybody can go into charging a membership, but what similar situation could you conceive for your business, whether it's getting some money up front, whether it's becoming a subscription of some kind, where you're getting regular pieces of cash? Again, everything is geared towards taking those perhaps 80 days that today your cash is out and chunking it back to 77 and 74 and 73 and ultimately to a number that you're comfortable. Make sense? Okay. So very quickly, I'll jump into the next piece. So the next piece is the way that I prefer to go and tackle I'm going to say, a cash flow problem. My first question to anyone that I work with is, I'd like to see a balance sheet and your income statement. And I'm going to read the income statement and the balance sheet and do two things. One, understand what is cash and how cash moves. So I've got a client, for example, I don't have to say it too loud, MacKay. Their cash model says that their membership dues are paid up front. So if I look at the income statement and I look at the revenue line, it's irrelevant. What's relevant is when the membership dues get paid. So we need to understand how cash comes into the building. If I look at somebody's balance sheet that is in a retail or a wholesale business, immediately go to inventory and look at what's the makeup of that inventory, how is it turning, how is it being converted into cash. So always eyes on how can this line on the income statement or this line on the balance sheet be converted or have impact on cash. This exercise that we take clients through, so Alan Mills out of Australia runs a business called Cashflow Story. This is some of his material. I've given you the website on the handout. You can go and check it out. But what Alan does with this worksheet is we work people through 7 levers that you can exercise to influence cash. So the premise here is each 1% improvement in these 7 things, what impact does it have on your annual cash flow, and what impact does it have on your earnings? And so in a time of crisis, and particularly when you look at the first line, you say price increase. Well, there's no way we can put through a price increase. And there's not a suggestion that each one of those is applicable to the same degree. But I find many businesses that I've worked with don't spend an awful lot of time thinking about price increases. They get price creep from their vendors, but they're often shy of changing their prices. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. You don't have to do a universal price increase. You can do that as you introduce new products. You can do that in a variety of ways. But you can calculate based on volumes what happens if I increase my hourly rate. If I'm a professional services business and I increase my hourly rates by $2 an hour, by 5%, whatever that number is, you can calculate the impact on cash flow. And then as you implement that and you do the modeling piece, you can say, okay, well, maybe we only will get 50% of it that sticks this year. But it's the mindset of I can tweak my price. Similarly, the volume increase piece. So example from my days in manufacturing, I ran one of the large window manufacturers in Western Canada. And the volume increases, again, how do you go about that? It's new markets. So can we all of a sudden enter the multifamily market in the Lower Mainland where we had no presence, we can absolutely do that.
Richard, I just need to ask a question. There are two people who've asked to come in, and Mark, and the sub phone number 604-881-4763. Are those your CFOs? Do you guys remember?
Yeah, I don't know why that's the office number, 881-4763, okay. And Mark is with me.
Okay, perfect. So good. I just needed to check that we're not being cyber attacked or something. Over to you again. Thanks, Richard.
No troubles. So back to volume increases. Yeah, so volume increases will come in different ways. They'll come from entering new markets. They'll come from new products. They will come from just being able to, in some cases, upsell a customer. So I know in our business, it was convenient for a customer to buy windows and doors at the same time. So a customer was only windows, we would try to find ways to piggyback. So the calculation here, very similar. If I sell more units, how many units am I selling? What's my average price per unit? And if I increase that by 1%, how can I generate additional cash? The other two pieces on any income statement, cost of goods sold. So if you're in a manufacturing environment, it's labor, it's materials, it's overhead. If you're in a service environment, labor is usually the largest component. But it's how can I take the goods or the services that I'm offering and offer them at a lesser cost. So it comes obviously from a sourcing perspective. So can you source materials or labor that's got a different cost? But it also comes from an efficiency standpoint. So what are we doing to look at the efficiency, whether it's on the shop floor on an hours per or a minute per piece basis, or it's looking at the efficiency of the labor in a professional services business, where you say, hey, our billing percentages are not where they ought to be. We're only billing 82% of our billable hours. How do we get that up to 83 or 84%? Overhead reduction is the most obvious one when you look at being able to influence cash flow in one of 7 ways. That's the first one that pops up. It's reducing unnecessary expenditures. It's in some cases going through some belt tightening on the labor front and on the overhead side, but that's the obvious one. And then the 3 that come from the balance sheet in terms of where you can gain significant improvements. One is your receivables. So what abilities, what techniques are you using to be able to take your receivables and collect them? So you may have familiarity with the notion of days sales outstanding. So that's a measurement that says your receivables are on average X days old. So if your receivables are on average 50 days old, how do you take 50 to 49 to 48 to 47? Because at that point, that cash is now coming into the business. So the concept is if I'm able to turn my $1 million of receivable 1% quicker, I will get $10,000 that'll be coming into the business on a quicker basis. The reduction in stock days, so stock, the reference to inventory, that's a classic problem of many manufacturing entities and retail and the wholesale as well, is we pile inventory because we want to have it available to us. Well, inventory has a cost. It has a huge cost because you're having to, most of the time, pay for it in advance. So what can you do to, one, reduce the amounts of inventories, but also perhaps shift the burden in terms of, not necessarily having to own that inventory. Could you, with some vendors, go to a just-in-time model or a consignment model where the inventory is on their books, not your books, and you're not having to write the check? So we'll go through a calculation that says if typically we have 90 days of inventory on hand, what would it be like if we could reduce our inventory to having it 85 days on hand? And then we can calculate that and see the impact on cash flow. And then the last one is, again, probably the most obvious one for folks when it comes to thinking about managing cash. Well, we can slow down. So we can take payments to vendors. In some cases, we can stretch them out. In some cases, we can turn them out and say, you know, put me on a payment plan. I'll pay you over a 12-month period, a 9-month period. In some cases, you can negotiate. In some cases, you can get a discount. So the vendor on the other side may say, you know what, I really want my cash. I'll give you 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% discount. And that's something that, you know, you could look to. And depending on your cash position, taking advantage of some of those measures, discounts particularly, could be quite attractive. So the sum of your work on each of these 7, you can add up and say, hey, through all of these, we can improve our cash position, ultimately our earnings as well, but we can improve our cash position by X. So this is an exercise we take folks through that really opens people's eyes, because behind the scenes, you're having to do a little bit of digging and say, okay, how does my volume increases, the units that I manufacture or the hours that I sell, how do those work? What's my average hourly rate? So any questions on this piece? And I recognize that I'm going very, very fast. I just want to give you kind of some snippets of things that we can do. Nico, you know, nothing? Okay.
Keep going. Thank
Good.
you.
So, okay, we're back to this guy. And so the last line there, and I've turned it, is, you know, take as many of the assets on your balance sheet and figure out how you can monetize them, how you can convert them to cash, and take as many of the liabilities on that same balance sheet and look at how can I defer, how can I extend, how can I term out, how can I negotiate. Playing those 2 sides is what will put you in a very strong cash is king, cash is mine position. The second grouping that I want to cover for you, I've labeled modeling, forecasting, and scenario planning. And a couple of things to cover there. Obviously, that requires that you have some base data. Surprisingly, there are 25, 50, $80 million companies that don't do budgets, that don't really track some of this data. So without this data, it's going to be difficult, but you got to start somewhere. So if you have some of that data available to you, you're probably doing a budget as well. And it's a matter of taking what you've learned through time, through actual results versus budgeted results, and implement some of that. So the first thing I look at is, can you calculate your cash break even? Some people will refer to that as a burn rate, or in terms of, you know, my cash shortfall every month if I don't make it. But ultimately, you want to be able to understand on a break-even basis, how much cash do you need? Because that's the number that's going to be very difficult for you to keep changing. So you need to find either some assistance internally or externally to give you a hand to go through that. And do it on a weekly basis, do it on a monthly basis. Yearly is not very meaningful. For cash, usually the shorter the horizon, the better. Obviously, it will include some assumptions. It's not going to be perfect. But give yourself a sense of what that break even is. Then I do 2 things with businesses that I've been in and with clients. One is a 13-week rolling cash forecast. So let me pull up just an example for you.
Why are you pulling this up? Do you think 13 weeks is enough for COVID-19?
You know, the difficulty with that is the further out you go, the less meaningful it is.
Okay.
You know, so this is on a weekly basis. You can do it on a quarterly basis, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. But in terms of being very actionable and close to your fingers, the weekly works really, really well. This is a model that I built for a manufacturer, and it's 13 weeks. It has a series of assumptions with respect to the units that they sell, pricing per unit, how payments are made to them. So in this case, they got 50% deposit up front and 50% deposit or 50% payment upon delivery. And then we can go into cash mode. So we start with a cash balance that we have at a particular point in time. We take into account our sales activities. So as we get deposits, as we get final payments, anything that we get from collecting receivables, and any other items that is cash that comes in. On the disbursement side, it's probably the easiest piece to do because a lot of your disbursements, particularly the fixed ones, have rhythms and cadences to them. Payrolls every 2 weeks, or it's every month. Your remittances to WorkSafe BC are once a month. Your insurance is once a month. So that one is relatively simple to kind of just drop in. But ultimately, what you're looking to do is to say, okay, so for this week, my change in my cash balance is it goes up by $3 million. My opening cash balance plus my closing cash balance is, now gives me my result. And then that 6.7 million comes right back up. Whoops, I'm sorry. That 6.7 comes right back up to the top. Sorry, my mouse is, there we go. And it just keeps going. So this is not going to be the reality. I guarantee you, these models are always wrong. However, two huge benefits. One, the learning from actually doing this part is significant and very, very important because, again, you're going to be forced to kind of look under the covers and scratch your way through understanding the patterns of your business. And then what it will also do is it will point out red flags. So in this example, I should have picked a different example. I don't have a situation where I go underwater in cash, but you could very well find yourself with a visibility that is 6 weeks out. Hey, I'm going to go underwater. My line of credit is not sufficient to cover that. I better start reacting right now. So that's what, again, just kind of the 13 weeks, close focused. The other thing that I do with this is I now, after week 1, I add week 14. And week 1, I look at my actuals. How good was I at really understanding my assumptions? And in this particular example, these customers are booked. We have their sales orders. Everything's fine. But this is the part that drives many businesses nuts. You ask for a sales forecast from the sales organization, and they say, well, here. And so what's the success rate of the sales organization in terms of their forecasting? That is not a simple task. It takes time, it takes practice, it takes systems and processes to really get a good understanding of ultimately customer demand, how that demand translates into orders into your factory or into your shop. So it's a model, we tweak it, and then we see how that goes. The other piece that I use, I'm just going to switch to the next one right now. Okay, so I gotta bring. Nope. Okay, give me a sec. There we go. Sorry about that. Too many windows open on the desktop.
Your spreadsheets are very neat. That's all I can say. My spreadsheets don't look like this.
Yeah, that's the anal CPA thing. So, this is a rolling forecast that I used for a client when I was CFO. So it's a picture of their budget for 12 months. But every month after we finish the month end, we drop the actual numbers in. And we do that for a couple of reasons. We do that so that we can always have a view to what our year-end number is going to look like. So our forecast now for the year is to earn $1 million. Our original budget was to earn $774,000, so we're running ahead of budget by $250,000. So it gives us visibility to the end of the year, and that's useful for conversations internally or with lenders or other creditors. The bigger benefit here is the ability to adjust. So you prepare a budget, typically, if you're a December year end, you're preparing a budget maybe starting in September, October. By the time you're into February, your assumptions could very well be outdated, or you've got a COVID situation, and you go, oh, okay, throw that budget out. So this enables you to adjust and go into any of the lines that, in the P&L and say, okay, well, for the next few months, I'm just going to delete these because they're not going to happen. We know that particular show home is going to be closed, so we won't be spending this kind of money. So you can make changes on the fly and give yourself and the rest of your team visibility to what does that do to our profitability, what does that do to our cash, because you can translate this into cash as well, and you have the visibility. So, to kind of recap, I look at 13 weeks, which is mission critical, almost daily updating and looking at it, and then I look at the bigger picture once a month over a 12-month period. So that's looking at the forecasting piece. The modeling piece, and just let me bring up another one, which will be the last one I've got. The modeling piece, well, the modeling piece is where you create a bunch of, oh, that's not the one, sorry, hang on now. It actually looks the same, but it's a different one. Here we go. Okay, my apologies for that. So the modeling piece is doing a bunch of what if scenarios. This is a very, very simple one. It's taking a quarter, so in this case, April, May, June, and it's looking at the budgeted activity, and you could drop in the forecast activity if you had newer data. But what we're doing is we're creating a template that says, based on a certain volume, what happens to cash in the organization? So I have the impact of sales, I have the impact of the cost of those sales, I have the impact of my receivables, what am I collecting on receivables, what do I have in terms of overheads, and then do I have to make loan payments? And similarly, I start with a cash balance at the start of the period, and I go through my iterations, and then I have a cash balance at the end of the period, and I have a delta. So in these 3 months, assuming no sales and no collections of receivables, I will chew up $1 million worth of cash. And I replicate the same concept to other assumptions. So what if my sales are only 25% and I still don't collect receivables? So better scenario than one, I'm only out of pocket $500,000 on a cash basis. What if my sales are 25% and I can collect 25% of my receivables over those 3 months? Again, now I'm in a better scenario because I've collected my receivables, collected $1 million of receivables. And in the last scenario, I'm 1.1 to the good. All that enables you to do is to understand some of the goalposts that you're working with. So, CEO says, hey, what happens if? So you can model these and get a sense of what the potential outcome is, and then put yourself in a position to, okay, so now we've got to heighten the crisis awareness around receivables. We cannot only collect 25% of our receivables over the next 3 months. So what must we do to heighten the awareness and the actions on that piece? So that's the what if piece. There's different formats to do it. I think from the CFO's perspective is, again, to understand the business and be ahead of the rest of the leadership team to say, hey guys, I've put this together. Maybe I'm all wet on our sales assumption, but I've got a pretty good handle on our costs. Let's come together and let's look at this. Does that make sense? I'm not going too fast, am I?
Everyone okay? Maybe another 5 minutes so that we can have questions, Richard, if that's okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm just going to come back to this guy. So let's do things. I'm a big fan of quantifying as much as possible, and particularly using it in decision support. Whether you're buying a piece of machinery, whether you're investing in a new employee, whether you're opening up a new market, you're contemplating developing a new product, I'm a big fan of let's spend the time to analyze the revenue piece, the expense piece, and the cash piece of what those decisions may look like. I may not be the guy as the CFO who makes the ultimate decision, but I want to be the guy that provides the data to the team, because I don't want to wake up in 3 weeks, 6 months, where somebody says, like, what kind of a bonehead decision was that? Like, who decided to pull the pin on that? So the analysis piece, in my case, I was fortunate to work with a bunch of great CEOs when I was CFO. We became best friends, and I had one in Winnipeg that basically said to the rest of the leadership team, don't talk to me about money. You want anything to do with money, talk to Richard first, do the analysis, then both of you come to me and we'll have a chat. So my personal bias to this is setting a culture within the organization, and it starts with the CFO, of quantifying and having data and facts to make decisions. You'll push back and say, well, you get paralyzed, it takes too long, we got to move, we got an opportunity to buy a parcel of land for development. I completely understand that. It's not meant to slow you down. It's meant to be more of a tool that you use and say, okay, well, let's think this one through. And in the last piece, you know this, I'm not telling you something you don't know, communication. The CFO plays a key role in communicating to the rest of the organization, obviously to external sources, lenders, creditors, debtors, Revenue Canada if need be, in terms of what's the message. So we're fine. So if you're going to a lender, we're fine. Here's our models. I've always erred on the side of perhaps being a little bit more open with a lender than some. Some people prefer to do this and just not share. I've been fortunate that for most of my career, built a relationship with lenders at all levels where it was based on trust. The sooner I build that relationship of trust with them by saying, hey, my financials balanced, they're on time, I know my ratios and everything else, they're a lot more amenable to have conversations with me that perhaps ultimately in a situation of crisis will benefit me. End of speech.
Thanks. Let's give Richard a virtual cheer. I just lost you guys. There you are back. Any questions for Richard? Just come off pause and off mute and ask a question if you've got one. Claudia, you got one?
I do have a question. It's related to all the various government programs that are available at this time, virus-related assistance of this, that, and the other. And I was just wondering whether you have some sort of pointers where I should have our CFO look, and what's available and what's the best place to look for information.
So what I've found is the large accounting firms, the KPMGs and MNCs and Deloittes of the world, have been very, very active on this front and have published a lot of very good documentation. The documentation up until even this week has been somewhat lacking in terms of how do you go about it? So there's a lot of statements out there. There's a $40,000 loan, and there's a 75% program, and there's a $2,000. There's been very little how-to this point, in part because in some cases legislation hasn't even been written or passed. So that is the first place that I turn to. So still today I'm using a document from KPMG that basically gets refreshed on a periodic basis that lists everything across Canada. If your business is just BC, the BC, hang on for a second.
The BC Business Council published one about a week ago.
This one is from Small Business BC Supports. So Small Business BC has got a document, which I'll send to Nico, again, that basically is a laundry list of everything with a hyperlink to here's where you can get more information.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll send it on as soon as I receive it from Richard. More questions? Any more questions? Then we can go to commitments. We always go to commitments. So one key learning, something you learned from Richard today, and if there's a commitment in there, let's see it. Who's going to go first? Okay, thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Nico, and thank you, Richard. This is all great. Richard and I have already had a fair bit of interaction, on the side, and he's helped me tremendously with doing some of what he's just been talking about. And I kind of went on my own and built not a 13-week so far, but an 8-week rolling cash flow projection that is basically my Bible for making decisions at the moment. So I am hugely reassured and feel much better in control of where we're going because of that. So I can just vouch for it. It's working for me so far, and I'm going to keep it working.
Good. Okay. Who's next? Joe?
There we go. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
We've been in really good contact with our bank, but I hear from you on the communication with some of the smaller guys, the lenders and stuff. Our AR is backing up, our AP is backing up, and so we're just putting inventory in the freezer like crazy right now. So it's cash flow is very difficult. So I'm going to be more in communication with some of the smaller guys.
I have a question. I was on a program this morning with the credit unions, and it seems that they're receiving lots of money as well. Richard, have you heard anything about that, or?
I have not. The chartered banks have had their capital reserves increased by the Bank of Canada. I'm not sure about the credit unions. I had not heard.
Okay. No, I just heard something this morning. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I was hosting a session, and I opened up the channel, and the president and one of our people were starting to talk about it. They got 100 million overnight, and they have to dish it out.
Okay.
And it's this fairly small credit union, so maybe go there too. I don't know. Oh, and by the way, Joe is looking for refrigeration capacity. If anyone knows of more space, right, Joe?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it.
Anyone knows, let me know. I'll let him know. Okay. Other commitments, takeaways? Jason, what did you learn? He's a CFO himself, so I can.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things I was just looking to collaborate, so to speak. We're doing a kind of a 90-day, so very similar to 3 weeks rolling. Also with additional, I'll just say there's a lot of consistency. And I appreciate your comment on your philosophy and style with your lenders of being more open rather than being closed and secretive. I would strongly advocate for that if you have the right lender, that they are your best partner if you have a relationship of trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah. John, how about yourself? You're still muted.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. Sorry. For me, a little bit different in the sense that a lot of the examples are manufacturing based. Our timeline for our projects are 5 years. From the date that we do a site acquisition, we have a long burn rate of 2 to 3 years before we get any income. And then the way our deals are structured, we get a percentage of hard costs. and then profit at the end. So we typically run 3-year rolling calendars on a monthly basis. The only thing, my big takeaway, so I kind of do similar to what Richard's showing, but my takeaway is we haven't had a need for our local banker from an operations standpoint, and maybe I need to take some steps to reach out to that banker and see if we can establish some lines of credit just in case.
Thanks, John. I saw Justin coming in as well. Justin Bonkis. He wasn't here when we started, but Justin, if you can just introduce yourself first and maybe your takeaway.
Justin, do construction management, general contracting here in the Fraser Valley. I think the big thing for me is just taking the 12-month budget and then doing the scenario planning, doing multiple different scenario plans. I think the challenge that we've had is just evaluating what the scenario could look like, because who knows, day-to-day things are changing. So yeah, I like the way that it was laid out, and Richard, I might reach out to you for a couple of templates maybe on what you had there. So
Absolutely.
Perfect. Everyone done? Everyone good? Any last questions, thoughts before we say thank you to Richard and we go on to our next Zoom session? Everyone good?
I have a question, Richard. Would you be willing to share your spreadsheets? Like, I was also looking at the scenario spreadsheet and thinking, oh, that's really useful, much simpler and better than what I do. So if that's available, I would be a very grateful recipient.
I will share them with Nico. The 3 of them basically sanitized. There's no client names or anything, so I will absolutely share them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Everyone good? Richard, thank you so much. And I'll see you tomorrow, sir.
Thanks, guys.
All of you guys, stay safe. And Joe, enjoy your ride.
Thank you.
Take care.